All right. Thank you all for joining us for our second session for our social justice, social community virtual symposium that we're holding today. In our first hour, for those who were available, we were able to talk with individuals who are supporting our university systems, our services on campus, that is. So we're looking at disability services, civil rights, Title IX, military veteran services, and our basic needs, including food insecurity. We're going to switch gears and go to a more community focused lens when we're looking at some of our services that are local to Charlotte, as well as expansive to other basic and other community needs when we're looking at the broader landscape of society. So I want to bring to you three amazing individuals who I'll let introduce themselves. Um, who I have been in contact with, community with, connection with over the course of time that I think are going to be some great, offer some great information for this larger conversation of this social community. Because when we're looking at our social community, especially right now in the landscape of we don't live in silos, we don't live on islands. Maybe literally, yes, but in the figurative sense, we connect to one another on a grand landscape. And I want to make sure as we're closing out Social Work Month that we're continuing the legacy of our forefathers and our foremothers that focused on community and making sure that we were connected and interconnected together and aware of how we connect to one another. So I have with you three amazing panelists. And again, if you're unable to join us for the entirety of the symposium, this video or these sessions will be posted as well and on our YouTube page later on. So we have Dr. Cherise Smith. And now I want to make sure. Cherise, make sure I want you pronounce, we will follow. Dr. Smith, how are
It's
you?
I am well. I am glad to be here. Thank you very much. You can just call me Dr. Smith. That is fine. That is
Dr.
fine.
Smith, tell us about the work that you do.
Well, I am the founder of Sankofa Educational Consulting, LLC, which empowers educators, students, families, and communities and teach them and learn complete and accurate histories, particularly the narratives of Black and Brown and Indigenous and other marginalized communities that have been systematically erased from traditional curriculum, guided by the Sankofa principle of going back and fetch it. My work reclaims forgotten stories across generations and institutional levels, from classrooms to boardrooms to senior communities, transforming how history is taught, understood, and lived. I could go on, but I'll leave some space for someone else.
No, that's a perfect, great introduction to the work that you do. And especially as we continue on, because you're going to hear more, and for those in attendance, social work or not, you're going to hear more about these conversations of these historically and intentionally marginalized and oppressed communities and repressed, as we're looking at repressive policies that are impacting communities as well. So those themes will continue, but thank you so much, Dr. Smith, for getting us going there. Danielle Willis, Timeout Youth, who is also, and I want to speak to this kind of as a veteran space because back in January, I believe it was January 2025, we did an LGBTQ webinar on health, safety, and well-being that I wish, I mean, of course, that wasn't the thing that changed the times around us. Folks, I do believe, learned from us, learned from you, learned from the space. We still live in a world of repressive and oppressive policies, so the work that we do is still available. And Danielle is still here doing this great work. Please tell those who are unaware of you about yourself and the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a time. My name is Danielle Willis. I'm an LCSW, and I'm also the Senior Director of Client Services at Timeout Youth. Basically, if you're unfamiliar with Timeout Youth, we are a youth center in Charlotte, and we serve ages 13 to 24. And we started off as like a drop-in space for youth to come and find community, LGBTQ youth and allies. But we've expanded to where we offer services now. So we have food help, housing help, clinical services. We provide trainings and things like that. And everything we offer is completely free.
Yeah. And in a time where the idea of cost effective, much less, cost impacted is limited, the ability to provide these services to a community that is impacted in so many ways that we're going to get into is still highly valuable and necessary. And Time Out Youth has been a one of those, especially as we're going to Freedom Fighting Missionaries, one of those staples of the community as well. So thank you so much, Danielle, for joining us again to continue this conversation. And Dr. Kenneth Kenny Robinson, the man of many hours, and this one especially. Let's talk to the people about the work that you do with Freedom Fighting Missionaries.
Thank you. Um, we serve primarily justice involved individuals and their families, those who have been impacted by the criminal justice system from incarceration or even charged with a crime. Everybody who gets charged with a crime does not go to jail or prison, but the results is the same in society and the barriers that you face once you have a background of any sort. Even a misdemeanor background can be impactful. Then when you add on race, gender, to that, it just makes that barrier that much tougher. So those are the populations that we primarily served. However, we in this work have been very housing focused to provide stability for the individuals and families we served. And in doing that, we have been able to create a pathway for those who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability, which allowed us to venture over to provide services and resources for McKinney-Vento youth and their families, as well as senior citizens on fixed incomes that put them at 30% of the AMI and below. So, because housing someone with a criminal background is one of the toughest barriers to overcome, we were able to use our networks and connections to then assist McKinney-Vento youth and senior citizens, as well as the advocacy and policy work that we do as well.
So here's where the work that I do, and this is speaking, so I'm projecting to social workers, those who, because I think social workers of practice needs to continue to repair those community bonds that have us kind of at odds with society, where we become more managers of the status quo, and bureaucrats than we are community members, even in our own community members. That I am thankful to have a chance to have space with you all who are really going to delve into some of those niches where we're talking about and Dr. Robinson, where you're talking about like the justice involved conversation. I've been able to change my language. Environmental justice is a space that I speak mostly on in my research, the impacts too, right? Because the impacts are more than just the individuals who are directly involved. The impacts they reverberate over, community members, family members. Like there's great impacts there. So when we're looking at justice involved community members, it's not just the individual who might be impacted by the felony, the misdemeanor. It's the family members, it's the friends, it's the community. It's a lot that goes into just that conversation. So when we're looking at this, and I really want to fix this in our current times as well, right? So the work that you all do focuses on education, access to resources. We're looking at services and providing services and using funding. It might be state, local, wherever it comes from, to be able to support members of our communities who are also intersectional, right? So as we're talking about that space of our lived experiences, it's not just about what people see, it's also those other identities that might not be visible. We're looking at disabilities as well. And as well, it's the identity that I didn't choose, right? So I didn't choose to be called a certain thing, but I am still. Race is that construct that still is a barrier for many individuals in our areas. So thinking out, and I'm going to start with you, Danielle. So I think we have a lot of policies, especially related to the LGBTQ youth and trans community, and that's going to expand to the work that our other presenters, our panelists speak on as well. What issues, and I'm also doing this to go ahead and let's break the ice. Let's not even like worry about the wading into it. Let's break the ice. So what's currently impacting the members of the community members that your organization and Time Out Youth and the community at large deal with? What's currently happening?
Everything. Um, I think when I think about that question, or I think about that concept, I think something that is important to remember is just the act of being queer is political. There are so many different things that are going through the justice system right now that are quite literally stripping away our rights, are threatening to strip away our rights just for living in our homes and doing our own thing and whatever. Um, and the thing that I think is the biggest barrier, and that is rubbing up against our community, is there's a lot of fear in our community, but also around people who support us or who are wanting to support the queer community. I know as an agency, we've had a lot of our big funders pull out because they're afraid to say that they are associated and supporting a queer organization, even though that we serve youth. You're taking money away from kids. So yeah, I think it's just there's so many layers of how this time right now is affecting and is affecting our community, but then also the intersectionalities of our youth that are homeless, our youth of color, or everything else. It's complicated.
And to that point of the complications, right? Because for those who are unaware of, we were looking back to the days of the Lavender Scare, where we had the same Red Scare. We're looking through like some of our political narratives, and as we speak through these terms, I'll do my best in the in the YouTube space when we link information in to kind of share some thoughts of. There's the idea of how we're politicizing as well the youth, and let's start with because I think starting with the youth across the board, because we're looking at justice involved, homeless, unsheltered, community members of color, and being able to, go back to that principle. And we're looking at like going back in time to see how we've been impacted in the past. Our youth are also impacted by this in ways that I believe our general society might not consider. Like we talk about social welfare, again, social work. We talk about neglect and abuse. But the idea of denying access to education, access to housing, access to resources is also impacting our youth as well under the guise of safety. However, I do believe if we're looking at some of our policies, they don't necessarily mimic that, right? So, are there any youth involved conversations or youth involved issues that you're aware of that are also impacting, and that could be policies, that could be, in a broader scope, they're impacting the work that you do or the folks who need the support that you provide?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes back to money. I think it comes back to funding, and an attempt by outside providers or politicians or what have you to just add more and more barriers. And I think it's easy to make those calls without looking stuff like that in the face. One statistic that a lot of people don't know is how many houseless individuals are LGBTQ youth and young adults, because their parents, they come out to their parents, they get kicked out, bing, bang, boom, that's it, that's all. Um, so I think the biggest thing that we're constantly talking about is how to continue to just even provide like basic resources to our queer youth, and how to keep them safe even in like a school environment or something where now there's just like 85 layers to us for us to even get into a school to help support them.
Right. And that's to the point of access, right? So your services are available, but who has the ability to take part in or receive support from? Again, if you're talking about funders who, if we're looking at the idea of I love what you do, but I just don't feel like I can be connected to what you do, creating a barrier and a level of I believe unnecessary pain and trauma, because that also reduces the amount of ability for individuals to receive support for a broader level. Because if it's healthcare, but it's healthcare for queer youth, now we have a barrier that's been, it's a contrived concept, right? So the complexities like that's we can go hours into it, but the idea that it's not necessarily connected to one specific policy, one specific concept, there's layers involved there.
Mhm.
Um, Dr. Robinson, let's talk to the same concept when it comes to, and I'm going to speak like to all of your supports broadly. So if I mention like justice involved, it doesn't mean that that's all that you do, but let's start there with the conversation of justice involved individuals and some of the barriers that you're seeing when it comes to receiving support or providing support to the community.
Well, we're always faced with lack of funding. Right? This work that we do is not free. Me and my staff are not volunteers. We are at work just like you would be at work every day going to the university. And we have livelihoods and things that we have to take care of before we even get to serving the community. And with the population that we serve, falling behind dogs and cats when it comes in terms of funding, right? Dogs and cats get more funding than we do in this space, and will continue to do that. That's continuously one of the biggest barriers that we face, as well as awareness that the people that we serve are human beings
Hmm.
who may or may not have convicted a crime, right? Um, and are labeled, but they're still human beings. And like you stated earlier, are not just individuals who, because of a crime, miraculously don't have parents, don't have children, don't have loved ones, don't have community, right? Because they do, and it impacts us all. So every day we are continuously faced with the challenges around funding the work to be able to sustain it and to grow. Unfortunately for us here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, where we have made great strides in the reentry space, um, we've lost almost 5 years worth of work due to one crime, right? Where a lady was murdered on a train. Although many women every year are murdered in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? Many mothers lose their children every year, predominantly black, over 100 every year. And there's no cry out for change of policy. There's no cry out for more punitive damages. Uh, but that have impacted us. I mean, we've lost $1 million just since that. We had nothing to do with that. Uh, but just like in the LGBTQIA space, when these things are brought forth, funders choose to go a different way. Right? State and local government choose to focus on more punitive things than reentry things, while stating and citing that, in fact, crime has went down in Charlotte, right? But forgetting to note that crime have went down because of services being offered to people and because people are not committing crimes of survival because they're in programs and getting resources to not have to do that, right? So trying to paint the picture as if the police are doing preventative work. They do not. The police call because something's already happened, right? They're not preventing crime, and they definitely don't have no programs around reentry and making sure that people don't recommit crimes. So, in short, those are the challenges that we are faced with right now, and they're growing. But in success, right? Because I mean, I hate to note all of the bad things and not say some of the good things. Uh, we have overcame the issue of being able to provide housing to individuals and families since only because they have a background. We can primarily house just about anybody with a background up now. So our number one challenge going into 2026 has been workforce development and the people that we serve and the families that we serve being able to find employment to sustain uh, their rental rates. So we're now fighting against uh the private sector who is, not yielding, right? They're not going to pay cashiers at gas stations and people who work at Walmarts and people who work. They're not going to pay them $25 an hour to do that, right? The airlines are not going to pay the majority of the people that you see in the airports 25 and $30 an hour, right? So we're now forced with saying, okay, well, these are service workers. These are people who keep the cities going across America. If we're not going to pay them to be able to afford to live here, then we're just going to have to continuously invest in more rental subsidies and vouchers, right, to offset the inflation and the balance because we have to have our service workers. The way that we cried out about essential workers during COVID, right? And the way that people were so thankful that somebody delivered a package to their house during COVID, that hasn't changed, right? Just because COVID has went away. So in short, I guess if that was short, in short, those are the barriers that we're up against.
Yo, and all right, so we're talking about going a little bit back. Arena Zarutska is the young woman who was murdered at the Charlotte on the um light rail in Charlotte in August, and to the point of, because I think when we typically hear this conversation, to your point, we're not diminishing the value of the life that was lost, but we're trying to amplify the idea of the other lives as well that are lost, right? And the other ways that lives are lost that don't get the same amount of attention, this don't get the same amount of politicization, that change the direction of support that can be received because we've seen policies that have been passed in a time where the idea of passing a policy in any state, locality, municipality is increasingly difficult. We've seen support here, which is great if the policy is passed in a way that supports the community, right? Or to your I think a broader point of these things, they there's intersections, right? When we're looking at not just the justice impacted communities, individuals who do commit crimes, but are they doing it for the sake of I like doing this, or because of other systemic issues that are unaddressed that create a opportunity, right? Of I'm going to have to survive one way or the other, therefore we can understand reasoning. We can hear, oh, that makes sense without saying we're justifying, right? So there's a way that we have to understand that situations are created and manipulated to exist. Understanding the conditions without justifying the actions. And but also we got to understand that some issues are happening and they can be stopped on the front end if we have that support. Because that's twice so far when we're looking at supports to communities who are impacted, we're talking about funding, right? In a world, and we're looking at Charlotte that has a lot of funding, but now we're looking at selective funding based off of other conditions, and those other conditions also impacting any of those impacts. There's a wave. It's not just the work that we're talking about here between year two organization, between Time Out Youth and Freedom Fighting Missionaries, but across the communities as well, right? And as we get into and I mean, we won't have time today to get into necessarily the conversations, but when we get to conversations of transportation and what's happening in Charlotte, North Carolina with the light rail, or not light rail, but the 77 expansion, right? That's going to also create impacts to communities as well that may not support and create other barriers, right? So there are these overlapping concepts, and I think what you're speaking to here um, hits community members, hits the those systems that we constantly talk about that are required with the community with policing. We hear those systems, healthcare, housing. There's a wealth of, right, and we don't necessarily have the support if only because the funding isn't directed towards the needs of the people so much as those other infrastructures when we're looking at this capitalist system that we live in as well, right? So now we get into education. Let's switch that gear over to Dr. Smith to some of the work that you do as it relates to education in these spaces of corporate, of community, and other areas as well.
Yeah, our work addresses urgent and interconnected challenges facing communities, not only in here in New Jersey or the Northeast, but in Charlotte as well. One of them is systematic erasure of marginalized histories in education. Politicization of truth-telling in education, achievement and opportunity gaps rooted in inequitable curriculums, institutional leadership gaps in educational equity, teacher retention crisis in education. Teachers are leaving by the droves. Intergenerational challenges facing Black families, community disconnection from schools and the curriculum. The upcoming America 250 commemoration of 2026 is a critical opportunity to start looking at this now. This work is urgent right now. These issues are not abstract or historical. They impact students sitting in classrooms today, teachers planning for lessons tomorrow, communities fighting for children's right to see themselves in American history, and elders navigating aging while Black in America. Every day that passes with incomplete curriculum is another generation taught that some lives, some voices, some contributions don't matter. Our organization, or what I do, provides practical strategies and tools to help interrupt these patterns. So I really like to go back and just touch on each one of them just a little bit. Black and brown students across America attend schools where their ancestors and contributions are minimized, omitted, and distorted. And in some places, like where we met, Matthew, in Philadelphia, where they are literally ripped off the walls. Pacing guides throughout Reconstruction in books, triggering the westward expansion. However, the Southern Poverty Law Center's 2018 study found that only 8% of high school students can identify slavery as a central cause of the Civil War. This erasure tells us that students of color, no matter, they don't belong in American history, while teaching all students incomplete and inaccurate narratives that perpetuate inequality. Our educators, oh man, they are having a time. They face an unprecedented pressure to avoid teaching about race, avoid teaching about inequality and slavery and systematic oppression, book bans, curriculum restriction, potential challenges, and legislative attacks make teachers afraid to teach complete histories. Many educators, especially white educators, feel a report that they're feeling unprepared and unsupported in addressing these topics. And as a result, they skip over it or, even say, well, maybe that should be something that should be discussed at home. Communities need educators equipped with frameworks that allow truth telling while protecting teachers professionally as well. Achievement and opportunity gaps rooted in an equitable curriculum. Research demonstrates that content-rich, culturally relevant curriculum closes achievement gaps more effectively than just generic skill instruction. In under-resourced schools, disproportionately Black and brown students receive the least rigorous, the least culturally relevant content. They're taught reading comprehension strategies without the knowledge base necessary for comprehension. They're asked to think critically without access to diverse perspectives that enable critical analysis. This curriculum inequity compounds educational inequities and limits future opportunities for our students. I'd like to, let's see, another issue here. Intergenerational challenges facing Black families. Black grandparents and relatives caring and raising for their children, which are called grandfamilies, face unique challenges at the intersection of aging and caregiving. I personally am in the sandwich generation. I'm a boomer, on the cusp of a boomer. So I'm taking care of an elderly parent, plus I'm taking care of my own children. Meanwhile, Black older adults face health disparities, economic insecurity, and systematic barriers with dignity. These intergenerational challenges require advocacy, and that's something that my company does. And they're challenges that require and address both education of children and justice for elders as well. Communities need voices to bring these conversations to the forefront. I could go on, but I just want to leave some space to any questions or comments or interjections.
And no worries, because as we switch gears into the back half of this last half hour, we're going to come
Okay.
back to some of those conversations. I want to really connect one thing that you mentioned here when it comes to education, to members of our LGBTQ and our local communities, as they relate to, if we're looking at gender affirming care. That's a conversation that is continually, or a concept. Let's start with the
Hmm.
concept
Hmm.
and how the mis and disinformation of gender affirming care really impact our communities. Because I'm going to bring Danielle Willis into this when we're looking at book bans, right? Because you're talking about education and the way our
Hmm.
community members, and not just community members, there are policies. I know North Carolina has one that is on the books, potentially legislation that might be upcoming, that provides and gives family members the ability in public schools to not just, because there's always the ability for parents to say, no, I don't want my child to read that, but also frame public libraries and also the books that are coming into public schools. So not just what you don't want your child to read because you're going to opt out of it because you have the ability to as a parent, but also you're going to shape the ability for education and books and literature that can impact individuals who are not your children as well. So when we're looking at that framework of education and information, and I frame that with gender affirming care because it's commonly a conversation or a concept that's brought up with not necessarily the total breadth of reality to what gender affirming care really looks like. Because now granted, I'm gonna go bald again in a couple weeks, probably this weekend, I'm gonna shave the rest of it off. But if I needed access to hair plugs or the ability to get hair, that's going to be gender affirming care as well. But that's not necessarily going to be how it's taken to the broader society. So Danielle, I open that door for you to discuss some of those, those educational related or education related issues as you see them when it comes to folks just knowing more to be able to do whatever, but to be able to do with proper education.
Yes, thank you. And that's a very good point about gender affirming care. We get gender affirming care all the time as cis humans. When you go get a haircut, when you go and you get Botox, when you go and X, Y, and Z. Um, I the bans on gender affirming care doesn't mean that people are going to stop getting a gender affirming care. Um, one of the some of the hardest conversations I have in my office, because I also see clients at Timeout Youth, is having conversations with 13, 14, 15-year-old trans babies that are like, I have Googled all of these things, and here is what I think I can do and how I can inject this thing and that thing and whatever so that my outside can match my inside. Um, it's still happening. And if it's not doctor led, it's going to be so fatal, but it's still going to happen. So I think a lot of what's happening is that miseducation of the broader public of what gender affirming care means. And the reality is, there's varying statistics on this, but the predominant statistic is that less than 1% of the trans population detransitions or changes their mind or decides that they went a route that doesn't actually fit with their body. Less than 1%. That's very few people. And I mean, we all, thinking back on when you were a teenager, preteen, whatever, like that person is not who I am, but I got the space to like explore and figure that out. And if my parents told me I couldn't do something, I was still going to do it too. I was going to figure it out because it's a normal part of being a teenager. It's a normal part of being a kid. And putting these confines on specifically our trans kids very bluntly results in suicide. We have lost kids in our building at Timeout Youth due to suicide, trans young people, because they could not access any support that would then have them feeling like a whole person.
Yeah, I mean, that in itself deserves its own pause to understand the severity. Um, and as we're thinking through this idea of regret, right? 'Cause I'm going to switch over to you, Dr. Robinson here in segue. That less than 1%. I mean, and I had a colleague who spoke to one of my courses, my classes, about this same concept of like the things that people regret that they regret more in percentage of than transitioning or detransitioning, having children, like the population of the world, or just we can say that like locally, that's like, all right, so I regret having children. We don't create the same level of policies that can then otherwise impact them at the space of, right? Much less when we have an individual who is trans, and we've had individuals, I'm going to bring this to, um, when we have school shootings and shootings that happen, right? We have legislation that's been introduced that stops all trans individuals from having access to guns. However, white men, boom, y'all good, right? Even though we do know in percentage wise, the community most likely to commit that same crime does not have those same policies introduced. So there's at the very least this discrepancy, right? And it's a disproportionate impact too as it relates to society. So there's all those broader concepts, but we're getting back to the transitioning from the idea of education and how education can help us be better informed and make better informed decisions. But we're taking policies or taking education away that could help us at least be better informed, understanding that our formative years are very important to our knowledge base. But things happen, and yes, regrets can happen. Dr. Robinson, when we're talking about regrets in individuals who might be justice impacted, how are you seeing like this thing that you may have done, or maybe not even you did it, because you were talking about like that felony or that misdemeanor. That's that hairline in between. I've worked at Walgreens where, hey, you know what? You can do a lot of things, but if you got that felony because that thing you did, that possession charge became a felony, now you can't work here. How have you seen things that might be considered or individuals who may have spoken of like, man, that was a bad decision of a certain time? How has that impacted them as they reach out to you for housing and other services as well?
I mean, it's a checkbox that have to be checked. Um, and unfortunately, our communities are impacted the greatest. So the intersections start, and that adds another intersection to what already exists, predominantly poverty. Like we say, okay, well, now I have another box to check, right? Because our credit, right? Because the credit is part of the system, right? Where we were never extended no credit to start with, right? Everybody doesn't, when you turn 18, start out with a $25,000 American Express card, right? That's not how it go, right? So where we would have Finger Hut and where we would have, a utility bill or something impacting our credit, right? That's one barrier. All right. Do you make three times the rent when it comes to housing? That would be another barrier. Then once you add on a misdemeanor or felony to that application, right, it had become nearly impossible uh, to get sustainable, safe, and affordable housing. Uh, Same thing with employment. Uh, just as Dr. Smith was stating, right? Because of all of these systems and barriers, our education is not where it's supposed to be because we would be at the worst schools in the worst areas, drinking the worst water, breathing the worst air, right? Generationally, right? That, our education is nowhere near equitable, right? And where we're celebrating the 1 out of 10,000 who may be exceptionally gifted academically, exceptionally gifted athletically, exceptionally gifted in the arts, to where it then becomes a benefit for the systems to push that person forward while leaving the rest of us behind. right? That this cycle continues on and on until somebody raises up and says, you know what, this is just isn't right, and I'm going to do everything I can to prevent it. But that prevention is people like me and our organization and our staff, as I commonly say when I speak. That's us. And people like me, me and Dr. Smith, literally standing at the base of a mountain with a pickaxe, right? Trying to overcome these mountains like one pickaxe strike at a time. Um, and I never want to minimize, what we're up against, no matter what we have overcome, that we are still standing at the base of this mountain, right, with a pickaxe, while we look to the right and the left of us, and they have heavy equipment, right, and they have bulldozers, right, taking down their mountains while we're sitting here picking away at ours. Um, and that's how tough the barriers are, whether it's in
Mhm.
employment, whether it is in housing, whether it is in education, whether it's in the environment, right? Because which is just as equally, cast aside for our communities while uplifted in other communities, right? The environment has had a great impact on us, right? Asthma doesn't just arise out of nowhere and impact a certain group of people more than the others, right? As well as many other ailments that's related to the environment. So we could talk about this stuff for 30 hours if you got 30 hours worth of time, but you're gonna have to pay me for
Yeah.
29 of those hours. I'm gonna tell you that.
That's why I wanted to give you space.
No, and you're all right because as we get like we have like 18 minutes left of this, and we're gonna transition to that last part because I mean so many jewels have been dropped here, and I do appreciate all your time, right, for to be able to share this because I hope at least one person is able to hear the information that you all provide and are able to, as we mentioned in our first session, to be able to share that even if you don't need it now, like that concept of you might not need this right now is going to come back around for the rest of the day because you might not need this thought. You might not be the one who thinks you could be impacted by until. And that until is and I'm gonna say this because I think the majority, I checked off the box in YouTube and will, that this is not for kids. Mama said a hard head makes a soft ass, right? So the ability for that idea that you're like, that's never gonna be me, guess what? It might be. And if it's not you, it could be someone that's interconnected to you. And that's to that theme of our social community, right? Because we are a social community. We're a global community. We're a community that has needs that will reach past where we're speaking right now to so many different areas. And we have to keep that in mind because if we don't, then we're either going to get blindsided or potentially not be able to provide the support that someone might need that we could otherwise be aware of. So to that, I'm going to go in, I'm going to go using what's in front of me in my Zoom screen. Dr. Smith, let's talk to you for access, because I know there was a question in the chat about accessing services and the work that you do. How can folks not just access your services, but also support your work? Oh, you're muted.
There
There
we
you go.
go. There we go. The QR code that's right there.
Got you.
You can find me there. And the way that you can support things that I'm doing is continue to become an advocate, attend cultural activities, and connect yourselves with like-minded people. Um, if you're a school leader, access guidance on diversity committee. Maybe there's a committee formation that you can create. Explore professional development opportunities for boards and administrative teams and leadership councils. I am the diversity chair for a Catholic high school here in New Jersey, and I am the chair of their diversity committee, something that would have never been 10, 15 years ago. I'm the first one to breach the threshold of this. And I am able to say, okay, look, we need some training here. You say you're going to do this and you say you're going to do that, but do you really know how to? So making sure that if you're in these spaces, make sure you're well educated yourself. I wanted to touch back at the LGBTQ issue that many teachers don't know how to talk about it. Just like with racial issues or teaching about slavery or disparities or things of that nature, teachers have no clue either. So when we're talking about professional development, if you are in those spaces to gather and make those connections to help other organizations like schools who are ready to walk the walk and talk the talk, or talk the talk and walk the walk, help them out. They are out there. It's just a matter of us asking the question and being in those spaces. Um, and for parents and families, request information about advocacy and what benefits your child. Sometimes we as parents, we're working multiple jobs or doing multiple things, and we just need someone to open a door for us, or just to show us, hand us a pamphlet, or lead us to a link. Life is lifing, and we need to be more proactive in teaching others, just not in formal settings, but in informal settings as well. Yeah. So contact me through the QR code.
Fantastic. And I will make sure that folks have access to your information to be able to pass the point of the QR code and be able to reach out to you as well. So going into Danielle, and we have a question for you in the chat also, for how has government funding impacted your agency and the services such as permanent supportive housing? So when we're looking at not just those barriers, I want you to, as much as you can, address that, like the impacts to funding and those issues, as well as how can folks support you to the point of not just maybe funding, but how can folks like be less ambivalent about being, hey, we definitely support you. Maybe they don't provide services, but what can they do in a broad sense as well?
Yeah, for sure. Um, just to like go off of Dr. Smith's comment about educating yourself, I think it is imperative that teachers, therapists, social workers, whomever, that you're just continuing to educate yourself on the LGBTQ community and what different things are being put in place to strip their rights away. I think I said this last time I participated in something with you, that it would blow everyone's mind if you knew how many clinicians refer clients to Timeout Youth to get gay therapy, but they're going to still work on the anxiety, the depression, the whatever, which I don't even think I have to explain why that's so infuriating. You are providing a service to a human. So I think education is huge, and trusting the people when they tell you something. If a kid, a person, whoever is telling you that they are whatever it is, just believe them. No one has to have an answer about what something definitely certainly is. And the other statistic that is just, I like statistics, they're powerful. The other statistic that hits hard for me is that queer suicide is decreased by 40% if someone has one human that is like supportive and like a supportive, affirming human. Like that's a very large difference. That's just one person. That's as simple as like walking down the hallway and just using the right pronouns for a young person or your neighbor or your male person. Yes, that's my rant. I think as far as like Timeout Youth specifically, the other way that you can directly support us is, yes, money. We love money. I believe strongly you should give your money to the people that are doing the work, that know how to do the work. It's silly to think that you know how to do a thing and then try to go and attack a social injustice or whatever. Like, we're already doing the work. We've been doing it since 1991. But also there's something very powerful about just experiencing queer youth joy. So people are always invited to just come into our space. We have kids in our space at all times during the day that are literally just being kids, young adults, whatever. They're there to just do their laundry, take a shower, play on our Switch, play board games, just be themselves. We have lots of opportunities for like providing dinner and just like having the ability to come into that space. And if you don't have the money, perhaps it's even just leaning into that being that one affirming person for a young queer kid.
Now that is an amazing concept, especially as we wrap things up with the idea of being in community. Like if you can do nothing else, just be here with us, right? And the one person that you could be doesn't mean that you are who you are as that one person is less important than being a person and a human and involved in that space, right? And I think that's great and to just affirm that the inclusive nature of the work that you do and the need for folks to be supportive and to be there. Just be here. Be here for people because again, people are going to be, kids are going to grow up, kids are going to engage. That's yes, yes. So, Dr. Robinson, closing out with you for looking at the ways in which folks can support. We've heard about education and educating yourself on past the point of what you might believe you know. Let's push past what you know and push further. Like education, you ain't gotta call it. It might cost, but we have phones. We have all sorts of tools that can help us learn something. What are ways that people can support the work that you all do at Freedom Fighting Missionaries, and how can folks access your work and access you all as well?
So we are very visible across all social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Our website is live and active at freedomfightingmissionaries.org. You can ask Siri, you can ask Alexa, right? You can't miss us. So if you're looking for us, you can find us and assess. And then there's many different ways that you can support. That is with direct donations, stocks, cryptocurrency, right? There's opportunities to volunteer with us in the community, opportunities to volunteer with us at our events, opportunities to attend the events that we have uh, every year. We have an event coming up on Juneteenth. Our documentary will show for the first time in Charlotte on Juneteenth. That's our annual fundraiser for this year. The theme this year is honoring educators, where those who will be receiving awards will be educators and social workers this year. We have a theme every year. It's just like last year, we celebrated women in the movement. This year, we'll be honoring educators in the movement. Um, Another way to support the work that we do is to support our students, especially our social workers and aspiring teachers. Um, that is why, for the past 3 years, I have taken my time to come to UNC Charlotte and lecture a social work class with Kevin McKnight, and going to be sad to see him go when he retires. But uh, sharing the work with social workers coming from where we come from has been very impactful. In fact, we have two UNC Charlotte interns right now finishing up a whole year of interning with us. We have one previous intern who she spent a year with us. Then we hired her and she's worked with us for a year. She's going to be graduating in May. Uh, and Three of the social work interns that we have had are white, right? And just simply would not have access to this level of work. Just like we can say, well, because you're black, right, and you're from here, you don't have access to certain levels of work. Well, it's the same in the white community. right? There's ways that you just wouldn't even have access to this level of work and to this population. And because of the social work department and the work that we do, this is allowing those students to see the work ground level, boots on the ground, working under somebody who spent 10 years in federal prison and decided to start a nonprofit, right? So, of all of the accomplishments that I've had, that's one of the greatest that had an opportunity to give back to youth who are choosing to be social workers versus MBA programs and chasing money and chasing other things, right? That they want to teach and they want to be social workers. So, please continue to support our teachers and our social workers. And the last thing of supporting us is so free to just pray. All you got to, if you don't do nothing else, just do that and leave it up to the creator and the master of the universe, and that'll work everything else out.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, again, the idea was not that I was going to be putting on the School of Social Work as a profession, but we're closing out Social Work Month, and I think it's great to hear so many affirming concepts when it comes to the practice, because I do believe historically social work does need to reckon with some of our lesser than and our some of the ways that we've been harmful to our communities. But that doesn't mean stay away. That means come. So that's also, again, a concept that was spoken of in our first session, this session. Show up, contact us, reach out, connect, communicate. Support doesn't have to be monetary. It can be just you bettering yourself to be able to not be a part of a system that oppresses and creates repressive policies. That's supportive, right? If now, granted, in a world that we do live in that is a part of a capitalist system that needs funding, yeah, we got to get paid for what we do. Folks are doing a great job. You can do that too, but it's not the only way. So please don't limit yourself if you're like, what, I can't do that. Well, all right, reach out to the folks and see what they have to offer. See what they might even suggest. What's a book? What's a thing that could be done, right? So thank you all so much for this. And then it won't be the last time again. Our Dr. Robinson, you mentioned Kevin Evers Knight, Dr. Evers Knight is or Professor Evers Knight is in the chat. He is in here as always. He actually did have a question I want to share before we run out of here about how do you all work when it comes to the correctional system regarding referrals and overcoming some of the barriers with justice involved individuals as it relates to housing vouchers. What's some of the thoughts you have when it comes to how do you work with correctional facilities and the impacts of housing vouchers?
Well, one of the person on our staff goes to the women's correctional facilities to let them know, how to access our services. We're partnered with a lot of other reentry organizations across the state, as well as the Department of Corrections, Department of Probation and Parole on the state and the federal level. So our services are widely known, and we get referrals from all of those sources. Again, I mean, we became the very first reentry organization founded by a formerly incarcerated person to ever receive Section 8 housing vouchers specifically for this population. It's historic to achieve that. And in turn, we have created a network of landlords and property providers who are willing to give people a second chance when it comes to housing. And we've also recently partnered with one of the largest residential companies in the country, a corporate landlord, right, who has removed barriers like three times the rent and credit and certain backgrounds, and provides X amount of houses, single family houses in high opportunity neighborhoods for our families willing to accept rental subsidies and vouchers. I advocated, as well as my staff and volunteers, to change housing policies on the local level that makes any developer who receives LIHTC tax credit, any government assistance on their development, mandatory that they now accept housing choice vouchers. So a lot of different work in a lot of different places that make it possible for a person with a background to get housed. And like I said earlier, now we are fighting the private sector, right, to say, you know, we just can't clean your bathrooms for $15 an hour and think that we're going to live here. And you think that you're going to get excellent customer service, right? And your hamburger's not hot enough and all of that. And I'm sitting here leaving Burger King and going to the shelter or sleeping in my car, right? So that's the next area.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for this time. If you were unfamiliar with Dr. Smith and Sankofa, no longer are you unfamiliar. Now you know. If you are unfamiliar with Danielle Willis and Time Out Youth, nope, no, no, not anymore. You ain't. Now you know. If you are unfamiliar with Dr. Kenneth Robinson and Freedom Fighting Missionaries, no longer are you unaware. No longer are you ignorant to a certain level of understanding of our community and those needs. You got some basis of understanding. Let's keep it moving forward. So thank you all for being here. Our panelists, thank you as always so much. It warms my heart, and I mean that like y'all being here, just it's uplifting. And for you all, whether you're tuning in live or later on, take something away from this. Education is highly important, and we can no longer undervalue the education that we provide to our community members as well as those who are impacted by our systems as well. So thank y'all. We're going to be back in at 3 p.m. for our next session, and I'll see y'all soon. Y'all take care from here. Peace out.
Ace.